We're at the point now where our character can move around, jump up, grab the ledge, shimmy across and climb over the top. But what remains to do now is to jump down from there. All right, so we don't have a jumping down animation, but we do have the jumping on the spot animation that we use to jump up. Now, we've already got this, so we can repurpose it. Of course, you could add another animation that jumps from up to down, but I'll show you another method of actually working with animations in Unity. And you can do this with any of the animations. So let's grab this jump on the spot. We're going to duplicate that. So press Control D, and that will give us a duplicate of that jumping on the spot. And it will put a 1 on the end if you have a look down at the file name. Okay, so let's just click on it and change it to jump down so we know the one that we're working with. Okay, so it's this one here. Now, if we go over into the inspector while we've got that selected in the assets, you'll see it's set to what it was before with all of these other settings from the previous jump up one. Let's rename it to jump down in the name of the clip. And if we play this clip, okay, it's jumping up and then it's jumping down, and we only want the second half of that clip where it's coming down and landing. And we can do that by playing around with this range here. So if we select this clamp range, then we can actually move the starting point of the animation along until it's sort of at the top of that apex of the jump, which you can see happening down here. So now when you run it, all you're going to get is this jumping from a height and jumping down, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so when you're happy with that, just select Apply. And once that's been applied, we can add our jump down animation and drag it onto our animator. So there's our jump down. Now this jump down is going to happen from hanging idle and then back to idle here. So we'll create a transition to there, and then we'll create another transition back to idle. Now it's this transition here that needs to trigger. So we'll add a new trigger, and let's just call that drop. And to this particular transition from hanging to jump down, we'll add that drop in. So add that as a condition. And at the same time, let's untick has exit time so we're not hanging around. Now, after this is finished playing, it will automatically go back to the idle, which is what we want it to do. All right, so now we have to add some code to do that for us, and I've got that in the climb up already, so I'll just open that up and show you what I've done. So here it is here. We have the code added to the get key down space section. So this is in the update function, and previously we just had a jumping up, so is jumping trigger set. But now we're going to have the space do jump up and jump down. So we're saying if we are hanging, if is hanging, then we will trigger this drop. Now when we trigger drop, at the same time, we actually want to turn our physics back on, because remember, when we're hanging, we've got the physics turned off. But we want to drop using gravity, so we need to turn the physics back on. And at the same time, we're going to turn off our anim root target, which is our anchor point, because we don't want that anchor to interfere with the dropping down. All right, so you've got that in there. Just save that. And let's go back into here and just play that. So we walk up, we jump as before, we press the space to jump off, and we jump down, and it goes back to idle. Now, at this very point, if you try and turn using the arrow keys, you'll find that you're actually stuck, which means, as we found out in previous videos, is that is hanging is actually still working. So back in this climb, if we go back up to here where the rotation code is, remember that it's if we're not hanging, we can rotate. But when we dropped, we never did anything with that hanging value. We never set is hanging back to false. Now, we can't do it in here. We can't type is hanging equals false in here because is hanging will then be set to false at the very beginning of the drop animation. Now, what's going to happen if you do that? Well, if you remember, our grab edge right up the top here is dependent on is hanging, and it's not going to run if is hanging is true. If we set it off to false before we actually run the drop animation, as the drop animation runs, it's going to go through that trigger point again. Remember the big cube that's all the way across the top of the container? And it will actually run this and grab hold of the edge again by accident. So we need to only turn off this is hanging when we've reached the ground. Now, we're doing that when we're standing up. Remember this stand up function that we're actually triggering from inside of the animation itself as an event? We could run this again from our drop animation, which is quite feasible. Now, it's going to reproduce the turning on of the physics and the turning off of the anchor again, but that's okay. We can just do that twice. The thing is that we need to turn these two things off before the animation runs and then turn this off after the animation runs. And we're already dealing with these down the bottom in that drop code. So it's not really going to matter if we just do this again, and we've already got it written, so we'll just use it. So let's go back into here. We'll go to the animation and we want to find our drop down. Here it is, our jump down animation. At the very last keyframe is where we will add our event for stand up. And that will just tidy up all of those settings for us once more. And if we press play, we can now go up, we can jump down, and we can move off. Now, you might have just noticed one little tiny thing there. If I just jump up again and I jump down, notice that his feet just shift and slide across the ground. And that's because we've baked in the X and Z values for that jump down. So if you select jump down in the assets and come over here, you'll see that these three things are baked in. If we turn off the baking in of the X and the Z, we won't get that little slide across the bottom, and then click apply. Now, one thing to note is if you do muck around with any of these settings for an actual animation, what that tends to do is over in the animation editor is it removes the event trigger at the end that you might have added. So you'll need to come back and add it in again, just for the one that you've changed and applied. And that took me a little while to figure that out because it was happening to me and stopping things from running. But now let's just jump up and we'll jump down, and now our feet don't actually slide across. They are kind of, because they're in the animation, they're slyly sliding across, but they're not moving your root with it. All right, so that's the end of this particular series of jumping up and climbing and moving from side to side. If you wanted to fall off the end, if you reach the end with a shimmy, you could add some collider boxes here in the same way that you've got this cube, this one here. You could add two more, one at this end and one at the other end, that have their own code attached, very similar to this trigger grabbing code that we wrote before, but you could actually trigger a drop animation instead by replicating this and sending through the code to the code that's on the bot, the climb up code.